In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos podcast for week 2 of the CFL regular season 2021 version. My name is Ben Grant, joined as always by JB. We've got a huge episode for you right now as we preview the Winnipeg Blue Bombers game and bring you up to speed on all of the developments of this week. If you hadn't had a chance to go to xsandargos.com, make sure you do at some point before the game. We've got a lot of great stuff on there, including a report card grading all of the positional groups from last week's game, a scouting report on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers with Darren Bombing of Bonfire Sports. There's an article on the offensive line grading system, as well as a video breaking down the offensive line play from this past week. So make sure you go and check that out. Let's get into it, JB. News and notes. So a few developments this week. The Argos made 2 signings and released 4 players. And I want to talk about a few of those. So the signings were Trey Williams and Brandon Calvert. Trey Williams, a running back, he bounced around the NFL for a few years, played some XFL. He was with Calgary until the very last cutdown day and was then released. I think he's interesting because he's probably a kick return, punt return candidate. And that was something, I don't know how you felt about the return game. We talked about some of the special teams problems in our post-game podcast last week. But in terms of the individual returners, you know, we thought maybe Chandler Worthy might get a shot this week, but he's one of the people that was released, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So, you know, Trey Williams, are you excited to see a fresh face back there, returning punts, returning kicks potentially?
No, I mean, definitely. You know, one of the areas the team needed to work on after that first game was special teams and having an explosive player or the opportunity for an explosive play. I think it's going to be really important for the Argos to have good field position, especially against Winnipeg. I mean, it'd be fantastic if he could come in and you know, give them a little juice in the return game.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we'll see him activated yet or not. That would be really interesting to see. I would love to see him out there. He was so explosive at Texas A&M, and he had a really nice punt return for a touchdown for the Pittsburgh Steelers as well. He's just got that great sort of lateral jump. Plus, he's got 4.4 speed, so he's got that burst and explosion to be able to, after making that jump, making that dodge, get out of there. So I'd be really excited to see him in there. Brandon Calvert, the other signing, is a linebacker. He's in, I think, kind of to replace Jack Cassar, who was injured in last week's game. He had a hip injury, and I expect him to actually be activated because I think he's going to take over for Cassar basically in all of those special teams roles where we saw Cassar playing last week, like on the wing and et cetera, for field goal and for the punt team, et cetera. The releases, one big surprise in here. So Chandler Worthy is obviously the big surprise. We'll talk about that one. Jalen Burks, the offensive lineman, was released from Wisconsin. Point Stevens, wide receiver. Quarterback Kelly Bryant and defensive lineman Julian McLeod were all released as well. So those names weren't too surprising, but what did you make of the Chandler Worthy release? Is this me cursing him by saying last week I expected him to be active? And not only is he not active this week, he's no longer even on the team.
Well, I mean, I didn't have him on my roster, so I was surprised that he had made the original roster. So, I mean, I think he's a fringe player in terms of talent, and I would guess that he was there for returning, and they weren't seeing the explosiveness. And really, if you're not going to get, I mean, that's what they need to add is an explosive player. So I didn't fully get why he made the squad. So I guess I'm not that surprised that they're moving on from him.
And I guess I've gone kind of back and forth on that because I also didn't have him on my final roster cuts. But once he did make the team, I kind of had, I guess, justified in my head why he was out there. And as a guy who had once run a 4.2, is extremely fast, and that was something I felt the team was missing last week. So I just felt it was, if you're going to keep him, you're going to have him on the team, well, then it's a logical step to get him out there and to introduce some speed into this lineup. But obviously that is not at all what they were thinking, because he's no longer with the team. I would be pretty surprised if he doesn't get a look somewhere else just because of that speed. And there are a lot of teams around the league that need a burst of speed.
With Kelly Bryant being released, that probably closes the book on the legend of Martavis.
I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Kelly Bryant back again. He may be one of these players that is on and off and on and off, because notice that he didn't have to quarantine this time when he was added, which tells you that he didn't go anywhere. It basically tells you that he waited around. I don't know if he was asked to, or it was suggested to him that he might end up back on the roster. But he could be one of these players that we see, and you see this every year in the CFL, where there are certain players who are added and subtracted week in, week out. And depending on the health of the quarterbacks in Toronto, I don't think they're going to want to carry fewer than 3 at any point on the roster. So if we get into a situation where Nick Arbuckle's injury worsens, or if there's an injury to Bethel Thompson or to Antonio Pipkin, I wouldn't be surprised to see Kelly Bryant back on the roster again. So I don't think we've seen the last of Kelly Bryant, but we'll see.
Well, I'm also interested to see what the league does moving forward about about roster rules and injury reports and how they're going to balance that with the new single game gambling.
It's an interesting topic that got a lot of press because of the BC Lions situation last week at quarterback. But I think that was just, it was an odd situation. It was odd, but I don't think there was anything nefarious going on there. I just really think they left it up to Michael Riley to basically say, like, you just let us know. And he really wanted to play and believed he was going to be able to. And right before kickoff, was like, you know what, I can't go. And then basically reversing his decision to start the second half. I don't think there was anything going on there, but that was obviously a really bad look. And I think that caused us to magnify every other little issue around the league with regards to injury reports. But remember, this is a new system. They're doing it for the first time this year, so there are going to be a few hiccups. I think if you subtract that BC Lions situation, it actually doesn't look that bad, but it's just something that teams are having to get familiar with. So hopefully there aren't any major issues with that this week. I wanted to talk about practice a little bit this week. Practice looked rushed, and I know JB, you being a head coach, have I'm sure felt this. It's one of those things where once the season starts, it feels rushed. Like Coach Dinwiddie's going to feel like he doesn't have a chance to breathe all the way up until the bye week, and it looked like that at practice this week. Now, they also lost today because the team was stuck in Calgary for longer than was expected. They had issues with their plane and didn't get out of there until the end of Sunday. So they basically lost a day there. So it looked like that all week. Practice looked rushed, looked like there was a sense of urgency, not necessarily in a positive way. It just looked like there were so many things to do. But the feeling seems to be from the Argonauts that the practice went well this week, but it certainly had a different feel to it than every other practice I've attended this year, be it in training camp or before last week's game.
Well, I think it's definitely one of the aspects of the season and why it's so hard to improve during the season, because you're bringing in some new players and you're still working on the plays that you haven't quite nailed, and maybe you get a little install and then that's it, and then you're into another game, and now you suddenly have a new list of issues to address. And so it really does show how hard it is to change your fates, if you will, as a football team. So I think our good start is a great sign, because I think it is really hard to make radical changes in your team when there's just no time at all. I mean, basically you're going to practice the plays you've put in and try and get them a bit more polished, and then you're off to the game. So I feel for the coaches, because that's just a hard thing to do, to basically have no real time to to try and improve.
Coach Dinwiddie was talking to us yesterday at the press conference about this a little bit, and he was saying, well, one of the more interesting processes was going through the plays that they had prepared for last week but didn't call, and so those are things you can now push into week 2. Those plays that haven't been seen yet, that aren't on film. Now, can we make any of these part of this week's game plan? Plays that we maybe don't need to fine tune quite as much or go over as much because they were ready for last week, and now you've got to add those to what you're preparing for this week and still have some sort of semblance of continuity out there. So it'll be interesting to see what this offense looks like in week 2, and we'll get to that a little bit later in the show. But what adjustments were made. I'm curious to see how this coaching staff responds to what went on last week. And I'll save that till later because I've got a few more thoughts on that. But let's finish up our news and notes here. Facilities at practice had improved a lot. I was pretty critical last week because they didn't have proper uprights at Lamport Stadium. They were, the uprights were about 5 feet high, and the speaker system was a bit of a joke. They had these end zone speakers that you could barely hear, so the crowd noise thing was ridiculous to watch leading up to that Calgary game. Improvements have been made, so they've got full uprights out there, so you can now Boris Beatty's field goals are still going over top of them, so it almost doesn't matter. But they have brought in their own speaker system, and it is extremely loud. I was deafened at practice when they went into no huddle and turned on the crowd noise. I had to move to the other end of the stadium just so I could hear myself think. So that was a huge improvement. I was really happy to see those changes. Injuries this week, there are a couple concerns. Robertson Daniels probably going to be out. He's listed as a head injury. Jamal Peters will probably be in for him at boundary corner. I'm not too worried about that. Peters has looked really good. He had a very good camp. He was one of the best DBs in camp. He actually got a lot of reps with the ones at that boundary corner spot. So I don't think there's going to be a huge drop off there, although he's not Robertson Daniels. I think he'll be okay. Dwayne Hendricks with an ankle has been out all week. Jack Cassar, as we mentioned before, with a hip injury, has been out all week. And Shane Ray's been out all week with a finger injury. So we'll have to see what happens with him in terms of the game. Is this something that they can wrap up? This is something that they can find a way to avoid him injuring it further, or is he going to have to sit? We'll have to wait and see on that. And then the limited participants: Philip Blake, Nick Arbuckle, Arjun Colquhoun. I am a little worried about Arjun. I don't expect to see him out there this week. We'll see. But Nick Arbuckle looked really good. I think he'll sort of have the same status as last week, backing up McLeod Bethel-Thompson. Philip Blake is an important piece. He was limited in practice. You really see it when you go back and watch last week's film in the second half. After he hurt that right arm, it's noticeable. He's really favoring it and didn't engage the same way as he did in the first half. So we'll have to see how Philip Blake looks. So that is something I am a little bit worried about.
Yeah, I wonder if the Argos are going to, rest guys who might be, on the fence in terms of injury for game 1 of this doubleheader with Winnipeg, and potentially have a stronger, fuller team for the game 2 of it. I think that probably makes the most sense, rather than have guys who are not 100%, do what you can here, but then for game 2, you get those guys back and they're 100%, and you're in a better place. So I would love to see, I'm fine with if that's the plan.
That wraps up our news and notes. Let's move on to this week's opponent, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So JB, give us a little bit of an overview. What is this game? How does this game shape up for you?
Well, it is 2 undefeated teams dueling each other. First of a back-to-back. I think that Winnipeg looked really good against Hamilton, who we both thought had real talent on their roster, and Winnipeg, I thought the score was a little bit misleading. I know it was 19-6 for Winnipeg, but I thought Winnipeg absolutely dominated Hamilton. So right now, I think Winnipeg's the best looking team I've seen play. They're defending champs. They're at home. I think this is a real stern test for the Argos, because they're better than Calgary. So I'm really excited to see what the team does against probably the best team in the CFL.
I wonder how much Hamilton just was kind of caught with their pants down a little bit, maybe having read their press clippings a little bit too much, taken themselves a little bit too seriously, thought this would be an easy regular season as they kind of, waded through the opposition, because that's what it looked like to me when I watch this. I don't expect that to be what Hamilton looks like week to week. And so I am wondering a little bit about that. I've coached a team before where we were ranked really highly in the country, and we went out week one and lost 36-0. And that just, it wasn't that, and we ended up actually winning the provincial championship that year, but it was a situation where the team was kind of riding on the predictions that everyone else had made. And to me, Hamilton looked like that. They looked like a team that thought they didn't really have to do very much. We just kind of go out there and take care of business, even though it was a Grey Cup rematch and they had revenge on their minds and everything else. They look like they weren't expecting it to be that much of a test. We'll see. It may be more than that. Maybe Hamilton isn't what we thought they would be, but I really expect them to rebound this week. And I don't think Winnipeg is as good as they looked last week. They're still a good team. I don't think there's any question about that, but I don't think they're the team that just completely dominated Hamilton.
Well, Hamilton definitely looked like a team that did not expect or scout the defensive line of Winnipeg. It was a jailbreak the whole game. I don't think they certainly didn't look like they had game planned for not having any time, and Winnipeg just lived in the backfield and blew up most of their plays. Like, they couldn't run the ball at all, and when they would try and throw the ball downfield, Mazzoli was on the run. They brought heat the entire game, and then so in that way, I think the Argos have a bit of an advantage because they've seen the ferocity of what Winnipeg can bring with their line and their linebackers, that you better have a short passing game in or it's going to be a problem.
I'm concerned a little bit about this matchup because it is back-to-back road games. Historically, football teams do not play well in the second week of back-to-back road games. And this is something that the guys on the Argos Fancast brought up as well, that oftentimes in years past, this would have been a situation where the team actually stayed out west instead of traveling all the way back to Toronto and then back out again. I know it's, Calgary and Winnipeg aren't necessarily right next to each other, but that's something that we may have seen in years past, where on West road trips, especially with a shorter week, and even more so with delays that were obviously unexpected. But obviously that's something that they're not allowed to do anymore because of the COVID-19 rules that are in place. They can't just decide, hey, we're going to stay out here for an extra few days. We're not going to come back to the city. They actually have to. And so that may factor in as well. But I think this is a difficult situation, and mirroring what I talked about at practice this week, that sort of rushed feeling. That's what happens when you are back-to-back on the road. This is a travel day today for the Argonauts. They really only had like 3 practices this week, and then the rest of it's just mental. It's not a lot of time. Winnipeg had not only an extra couple of days, they're back-to-back at home. So that's a huge advantage.
And there's no doubt that the Argos will have their eye on the home opener coming up, next week. I think it's going to be, an uphill battle, for the team because, my takeaway, from watching Winnipeg was defensively, I'm concerned. Offensively, like in terms of Winnipeg's offense, that doesn't strike fear into me. But Winnipeg's defense, I thought those guys were just, whether it was Jeff Coate or the Big Hill or Richardson, they were just all over Hamilton, and strong, blowing guys up, like not just speed moves, but like they could basically whatever you want. They brought speed, they brought strength, they played some twist games. I'm and then the Winnipeg DBs, of course, were absolutely sitting on those quick passes because they knew there wasn't going to be time. So I think it's that's going to be a challenge. But I think we can get into Winnipeg's offense, I think that there definitely is a chance that we can control their passing game.
Well, let's transition. We've already started doing it, but why don't we transition into talking about the strengths of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers? So what do you see as the biggest issue, their biggest strength? I have a feeling I know what it's going to be. I think it'll be the same as mine. But what's the main concern heading into this matchup?
Yeah, I think their biggest strength is their defensive line and linebackers. That the defensive line is tall and fast and strong. That they are able to get to the quarterback in a variety of different ways. The linebackers are huge dudes, as you would expect from an O'Shea team. They fly to the ball, in terms of underneath passes or screens. They are a ferocious defense. I think very much the kind of defense I would like to see Toronto build to. And I think we have the talent to. But Winnipeg is already there. So to me, that is the biggest concern is how do you not let that defensive line linebacker crew just blow up your game plan, especially for a team like the Argos that already are not very good at running the ball.
Winnipeg's the kind of team that if they played every week in mud and rain would never ever lose. They're the kind of team that can dominate the run on both sides of the ball. They've got a great running offense. That was one thing that really impressed me. I agree with you. I think the strength of their team is the defensive line, but just behind them is that offensive line and the lanes that they're able to create. They ran for almost 150 yards last week. And it seemed to be effortless. It was like every time there was a carry, the first 3 yards were automatic. Before anything even happened, it was like, well, here's 3 yards, and now the running play sort of begins. That's what it looked like. And it certainly didn't look like that with Toronto's run game in Calgary last week. It was a very different style of offense. And now Winnipeg's offense has issues, and their defense maybe has some issues too, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, in terms of their strengths, I think stopping the run and then trying to keep the rushers at bay. I actually had trouble evaluating the Winnipeg linebackers because the defensive line was so dominant. I couldn't tell how much of it was their job being made easy because of the defensive line. But yeah, certainly that positional group looked pretty good last week too.
Yeah, I mean, Winnipeg's offensive line is also very good. I thought maybe at left tackle there was a little bit of a weakness for a speed move. But they have some huge guys on that offensive line, and they get to the second level in a heartbeat. Like you say, like on the running plays, those offensive linemen were grabbing linebackers, and it was like you say, it was 3-4 yards right off the snap of the ball. So that is also, but that's great. I mean, I think it's really good to play somebody who's going to stress the weaknesses, and really get a sense of, have we improved, or how much work has to be done in the areas that we're not great at.
Yeah, it'll be a really good test for the whole team, I think, this week, because we know the Blue Bombers are a complete team, and regardless of what you think, I don't think they're going to be there at the end of the year in the Grey Cup. I don't think this is the kind of team that is going to be able to repeat that way, but they're good, and there was never any question about them belonging in the picture. So this will be a good test. Calgary, we didn't really know what to make of last week, and we still don't, I guess. And we probably still won't after this week with the BC Lions, who we also don't know what to make of, I guess. Although I think I've got them figured out a little better than I do Calgary. But yeah, it'll be a good test. Like you mentioned, testing Bryant at left tackle, I think will be interesting with some of our speed guys, because like you said, I do think there is some vulnerability there. I hope Shane Ray gets to play. Our defensive line didn't really live up to expectations last week. And going against a tough offensive line this week, this would be a really nice opportunity for them, because if they can come out this week and really show themselves, that will be impressive, because this isn't an offensive line that typically lets a defensive line be the stars of the show, because they can shut pretty much everything down. But I think that stems from their running game, and that's why Toronto has to find a way to stop that. And it worries me because they had trouble stopping Calgary's run last week, and Winnipeg's running game is so much better. They've got to find a way to do it. That defensive line, the linebackers, they have to bottle that because I don't think Winnipeg's passing game is that good. However, if you are terrified of the run, suddenly it's much easier to pass because you're overcommitting. You're not just taking read steps, you are actually flying in there, trying to clog up holes, etc. And there's all sorts of space open in the passing game. And that's something that we can't really let happen. So let's transition now to those weaknesses and talk about where Toronto might be able to take advantage of Winnipeg. So how do you see it, JB? Where are those holes for the Blue Bombers?
Yeah, I don't think Collaros is a star. I think he's fine. I think he's got a good arm, but he is not a quarterback that I think we have to fear. I don't think you need to really game plan for him. Watching that game, he loves to scramble. He loves to scramble right. He loves to throw right. So right off the bat, you have to have that outside edge. You cannot let him scramble to the right. DBs have to be practicing, plaster in terms of when the quarterback scrambles, everybody stick to your guy, because that's basically how he scored his touchdowns against Hamilton is scramble plays and, rolling on the right and then throwing it 40 yards down the field. If we can keep him in the pocket and force him to be surgical, he definitely makes questionable throws. There were a couple of times I thought Hamilton could have picked him off. I think that's there in terms of the defense getting some interceptions, if we can keep him in the pocket.
Yeah, I'm not really that worried at all about their passing game, and I think this is a team that will struggle when they get behind. I think they did get behind last week, Hamilton scoring the first points of the game, but it was so early that it wasn't really like that. It didn't change the way that Winnipeg was going to go about playing their game. But yeah, there's vulnerability there. These receivers don't really scare me. Like, I do like Lawler, and I know Adamski had a pretty big game last week, but these guys aren't. They don't worry me. I don't think there's a real fear there. And like you said, Collaros he's a good CFL quarterback. There's not much question about that. But he's not the same as Bo Levi Mitchell.
No, exactly.
And you look at what the defense did with Bo Levi Mitchell last week. Bo didn't have a great game. And some of that was, Calgary's receivers aren't overly impressive either, I guess. But it's still, that's the situation we're talking about. If they can make Bo Levi Mitchell look as he did last week, I don't see why the defense can't make Zach Collaros look less than he did last week.
Yeah, he reminded me a little bit of Russell Wilson's game. I thought, that kind of, if you let him outside the pocket, he loves to scramble. He loves to throw on the run, kind of sandlot football, where plays break down and he, get open. And his receivers are, not stars, but are really tough, fight for the ball. A couple of times they really came through with contested catches. So, he reminded me of that. So I think the game plan is the same way to try and beat him, which is maintain your edge, force him to pick you apart in the pocket. And, I wouldn't worry about the run. I really don't. That's not how they beat Hamilton. The touchdowns were through the air. If they put up 160 yards running, who cares? If you can take away those huge plays. Like, he did not march them down the field. They had huge chunk plays. Take away those chunk plays, I think that they're right there.
See, but I don't think you can look at it in a vacuum like that, because I think their huge chunk plays came from the fear of the run. And so, let them run, let them get 160 yards running. I don't buy into that. I'm concerned about that idea, because that's what leads to there being a huge bust. You have people overcommitting to the run, saying, look, we got to stop. At some point, we have to be able to stop this ground game. And that's when you get burned, because you end up in zero. You end up getting caught in a blitz or something like that.
Yeah, I would say, that you're not going to stop the run against Winnipeg. That's what they're built to do.
Yeah, but you can't just sit back and say, well, let's not even bother.
Well, I think you can. I think you can let them run and take away and concentrate on making sure that you never let them get chunk plays.
I don't like the idea of having the defense out there for these like 12 play drives, and especially if the offense is struggling to move the ball, getting these 2 and outs. I just don't think that's going to lead to a victory here. I think you have to. I think you have to stop the run. I think you have to force, and that's what I would like to see them do. Like I want them to go all out to stop the run and make them beat you through the air, make them beat you passing, because I think that's not what they do well. But that'll be interesting to see what happens, because we both got sort of differing philosophical views. And I understand your point of view. I get what you're saying. And I do actually like it, but it's not what I would do. I think I would actually go out and try and shut down their strength.
You'd like to stop the run, but I just don't think when you look at Winnipeg, that's what they're built to do. That's what they do. They won the Grey Cup running the ball. So yes, of course, I think Toronto would love to stop the run, but I think you got to be realistic. Are we going to be able to stop the best running team in the CFL? I don't think we are, but we'll see what they come up with.
The other area of weakness I can find on the Blue Bombers is their defensive secondary. Now, individually, these are guys I like. Actually, almost all of them I think are really interesting players, but there's so many of them that are new to the CFL, and it looked a little bit like that last week. When you look back at some of those plays, Hamilton missed some open receivers. There were opportunities there where there weren't necessarily busts, but there was space in the middle of that secondary. And I'm hoping that McLeod Bethel Thompson can take advantage of that, because you've got so many of these new players who are used to playing in much tighter quarters. It showed last week. They weren't used to that wide open field, and there were gaps over the middle. So that's something that I would really like to see. I think that there's a chance this could end up being a really big game for Devaris Daniels this week too, who was largely shut out last week. Deshaun Amos played an amazing game for Calgary. Man, he was one of the best players on the field start to finish in that game, and he really only let Devaris make those 2 catches. And I don't think he was even on Devaris for one of those 2. But this is an opportunity for him. I think there will be some fear about Eric Rogers after his big game last week. I think they're probably going to game plan for Daniel Braverman too, because he kept coming up with those huge second and long conversions. I think there's going to be space. I think we're going to end up with Devaris Daniels isolated one-on-one a lot, and I think he's going to win a lot of those matchups. So that's something I'm hoping they make a part of their game plan this week.
Offensively, I agree. I think that you largely have to abandon the run. Kind of the flip side of my stop the run argument. I don't think we're going to have much success running the ball on Winnipeg. But I do think that the Argos match up really nicely. We're not a team that needs guys to get deep. That we have these fantastic possession guys, and, those sort of 8-10 yard passes, that's what you need to beat Winnipeg. You need those drives, because if you're looking for the bomb like Hamilton was, you're just not going to have the time. Quarterback is not going to have 4 or 5 seconds to sit and wait for a deep route to develop. So I think they have to game plan ways of slowing down the pass rush, screens and, bubbles and drags. And, you have got to punish those guys from just pinning their ears back and going. And I hope that, with, quick slants, lots of underneath stuff, just past the linebackers. I hope to see a lot of that, and I think that that's in fact what we're built to do.
JB, give me one thing you want to see this week. What's the one thing that you're looking for where if you see that, you'll at least be satisfied for the week?
I want to see a rushing touchdown.
I don't know if you're going to see that.
Well, that's what I want.
Because we abandoned the run last week because it wasn't working, which I actually like. I really respect that about Coach Dinwiddie. Last week in Calgary, when it was pretty clear the running game wasn't there, he basically just called it off. He's like, all right, well, no more running plays then. And there was a period of time there in the second half where there just really weren't running plays. There was not until the end when suddenly we were in position for a field goal and they wanted to actually drain some time off the clock. But up until that point, it was like, well, there goes the run. And I love that. Why force it? I hate when coaches, when clearly you're not able to run, and then you still keep mixing in run plays to, quote unquote, keep them honest. And suddenly it's, 2nd and 9 every single series. So yeah, no, full respect to Coach Dinwiddie for doing that. I think that's going to happen this week too. I don't see the Argos figuring out the run game against the Blue Bombers. So I don't think you're going to get your rushing touchdown unless it's like a quarterback sneak or a 1-yard plunge, maybe. But all right,
I'll take it. I think it is important for them to have that be a red zone weapon, which it definitely was not. In 2019.
So the one thing I want to see is something I alluded to in our last segment. I want to see Devaris Daniels get involved. I want to see him be the player that I know he can be. He's the best receiver on this team. He is. There's a reason that he's lined up there at X. There's a reason that they've got him taking on the best member of the defensive secondary every week. He's the best receiver. So let's see him get used like that. Let's see him get open. Let's see him win those battles. Let's see some faith in him beating his guy, even when it's contested, even when he's in tight coverage. Let's see Devaris Daniels go out and make plays because he can. That's why he's here. That's why he's the number one. Let's get Devaris involved this week. That's the one thing I want to see from the Toronto Argonauts when they take on Winnipeg this Friday. All right, JB, score prediction. How do you have this one finishing up? So we in preseason, and obviously we don't have to stick to our preseason predictions, but we were both obviously wrong last week in our preseason call. But our prediction last week was pretty close. We predicted a 24-20 loss. It ended up being a 23-20 win. Let's see. We both had this as a loss with our preseason predictions. Have you moved on that at all? How do you see this one shaking out?
I know. It feels terrible to feel like I don't believe in this team. I don't think they're going to win this game. I do think they are going to win the home opener. I don't think they're going to win both. So if I've got to pick one that they're not going to come away with, I'm going to say that they're going to lose in Winnipeg. I think that Winnipeg probably wins. Again, close, probably 25-21 Winnipeg.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to you on that one. And for the same reasons, I believe in this team. I think the Argonauts are a really good team. I don't see them winning this week because I think it's again, we used this so much last week. It's a tough ask.
I think to as anybody who watched 2019, to suggest that the Toronto Argonauts will be in a highly competitive game on the road against the defending Grey Cup champs, that is not nothing.
Now, you do remember, however, that this was the only non-Ottawa team the Argos beat in 2019. Somehow, their only non-Ottawa win in 2019 was over the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Man, that was probably the most exciting game of the season for the Argos. But they beat Winnipeg. They beat the Grey Cup champs.
I remember that game. Winnipeg did not practice once that week. There's no chance that was not Mardi Gras.
Yeah, I don't think they were expecting it to be as tough a game as it was. But I don't know, like Winnipeg wasn't, I don't know, they weren't a dominant team until the playoffs last year. Like they were sort of hit and miss as the season went on last year. But again, that's not something we need to rehash here. But yeah, I don't think there's any shame in a loss to Winnipeg this week. I think 3 days of practice, back-to-back weeks of travel, you're going into a full stadium in Winnipeg, really excited fan base, and it's against a good team. I think there's too much for this week. So yeah, I have this as a loss. I've predicted a score of 28-23, and I think I know the betting line keeps getting taken off the board, so I don't know how they'll establish. But I did see 5.5 at one point. I feel like that's a pretty good. I think that's a pretty good number. So I've got it as a 5-point loss for the Argos, 28-23. Well, that will just about do it for us on this week's episode of the X's and Argos podcast. Be sure to join us after the game, where we will have our post-game reaction podcast and kind of go over what we saw out there. If you haven't done so already, please take a second to rate, review the podcast. It helps other Argos fans find out where we are. And if you know any other Argos fans that aren't currently listening to the podcast and aren't currently going to xsandargos.com to get all of their Argonauts information, please direct them that way. And don't forget to subscribe as well so our podcasts show up right there on your phone. For JB, I'm Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see you.